recognize Senator Uggan to do a quick amendment on 135. Do I understand?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, first and foremost, I want to thank our colleagues for allowing me to pull back Bill number 135-32, which is in reference to the Guam Veterans Commission. And the motion was to recall that proposal with the express intent of moving for the deletion of Section 6, which can be found on page 4. So, Mr. Speaker, consistent with the motion to recall this legislation, I'd like to move for the deletion of Section 6. And I want to preface it primarily because shortly after we had acted on this and moved it to third reading for consideration by the body, my office was visited by the director of the Guam Veterans Affairs Office. And he requested consideration that this section be taken out because of the nature of the Guam Veterans Commission. It is advisory in nature, and that the responsibility falls with him in terms of carrying this out. Finally, Mr. Speaker, I just want to say that navigating the waters of working with our veterans is certainly something that has highlighted my time here and service over the course of the last year. And my job and my intent has always been to see what we can do as veterans to advocate for addressing veterans' concerns. And if this particular provision contained in this bill is not to the liking of a critical individual who has to and should always advocate for our veterans, then I will yield to that for that consideration. Recognizing that there already have been highlights by the Office of the Public Auditor, Public Accountability, that there were some concerns between 08 and 11 in terms of accounting for the finances, and that responsibility still falls on the Director of the Guam Veterans Affairs Office. And I want to continue to maintain a good working relationship with not only with that office, but with our veterans and the members of the Veterans Commission to ensure that we can continue to advocate for our veterans and bring the best services that they have earned. They have rightfully earned by donning the uniform. So, Mr. Speaker, that is the motion that is before the body. Thank you very much, Mr.
Thank you very much. On the motion to delete Section 6 and to renumber,
Yes.
any senator wish to be heard on the motion? Any senator wish to be heard on the motion to delete Section 6 and renumber? Hearing no objection, so ordered.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, senators. And now I'd like to move for the placement to third reading. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
On the motion to send the 135 as amended down to voting file, any objection? Hearing none. Senator Munya Barnes, you're recognized on your resolution.
Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to move resolution number 358-32 LS as substituted by the author to the third reading, and if I can speak on it, please. I promise I won't take long.
Any objection? Hearing none. Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank all my colleagues in this body for jumping in support of this resolution 358, which is relative to requesting for declaratory judgment from the Supreme Court of Guam as to the ability of the Legislature in Guam through a duly passed law of Guam to direct the Guam Election Commission to place a measure on the ballot pursuant to Title III, Chapter 16, Article 4 of the Guam Code annotated. And if I may, I will give a very brief history, Mr. Speaker. On February 1st, 2014, a majority of members of the Legislature in Guam, this August body, voted to adopt Bill number 215-32, which directed the Guam Election Commission to place a specific question before the people of Guam. Upon the adoption, Mr. Speaker, of this Bill 215-32, it was transmitted to the Guam Election Commission, and simultaneously, consistent with the practice of prior legislatures, Bill 215 was transmitted to the governor and eventually was given a public law number which is now Public Law 32-134, and that was done on February 16, 2014. On March 6, 2014, the Guam Election Commission Board of Commissioners decided that they would not place the question proffered by the legislature on the November 2014 general election ballot, despite, Mr. Speaker, despite being even informed by their legal counsel that they could follow the law without any liability. On March 7, 2014, the Speaker and the legislature received a letter from the Guam Election Commissioner's Executive Director indicating that the Guam Election Commission would not be placing any question on the ballot as directed by the Legislature in Guam because the GEC, which is the Guam Election Commission, believes that Bill 215-32CR presents a delegation of legislative law making authority not permitted by the Guam law. Consistent with the requirements of this 3GCA, and I will quote the sections 16501 to 16502 and 16503, the Speaker of the legislature appointed members of the legislature to draft arguments in favor and in opposition to the question presented and submitted those arguments to the Guam Election Commission in a timely manner. As you know, both Senator Yamashita and I were given the opportunity to submit a brief summary, and that summary was in favor of, and because our colleague, Senator Rodriguez, was in opposition to the measure, he was designated to give the opposition summary points. The Guam Election Commission, Mr. Speaker, has clearly indicated that it will not carry out its ministerial duty to place the question presented in Public Law 32-134 on the November 2014 general election ballot, and that general election date is on November 4th. And by its actions and expressed intentions that the Guam Election Commission has taken it upon themselves to define the authority of this august body, which is the powers and duties of the legislature and is of great public interest. Mr. Speaker, whether you agree with the subject matter on Bill 215 or not is irrelevant. What is relevant is whether or not we as a body can place issues before the voters of Guam. What is relevant is our powers and our duties. What is relevant is our institutional integrity as a separate and co-equal branch of government. So, Mr. Speaker, I respectfully and sincerely ask my colleagues and I thank my colleagues who have put their name onto this resolution. But I ask that this request be answered and that the integrity of the powers and our responsibility to introduce legislation, that be supported. And that laws that are in place today, and when those laws are followed, that the agency in charge has the ministerial duty to follow. So, Mr. Speaker, I ask that my colleagues help me support this measure. I want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak briefly on this Resolution 358. And again, extend an undangkluna si Zeus Masi to all my colleagues and ask that all of them support this measure. Sainamasi.
Thank you very much, Senator. Senator Yamashita, you're recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, for allowing me to stand in full support of resolution number 358-32 LS. You know, Mr. Speaker, to me, this is such a non-issue. How is it that a law was passed, but a law is not followed? I do not understand how this even became an issue. But it is an issue. And the issue isn't even about the content of the question, as the previous speaker said, but it really is the issue about what is the Guam Legislature about. And we are about identifying, researching, deliberating, arguing, passing public policy in the best interest of all people. And we are about forwarding it to the executive branch for consideration and action. And all of that happened. So a law was passed. And then a group decided they weren't going to follow the law. And for me, it just got a little confusing for me because different attorneys had different opinions. And so at the end of the day, it was, well, I suppose because we couldn't get someone to follow the law, the recommendation was, we'll have the courts tell them they have to follow the law. So it is with that intent that I stand in full support because for me, everyone has to follow the law. And the law is that we shall put a question in front of the people. And the questions have been put before people before on our island. And so this is, again, happening. And as the main author of this resolution stated, we're not even focusing on the content of the question. But it is really critical to say that when a law is passed, the law shall be followed. And that is a very important question that needs to be now answered by the courts. And it needs to be answered because if we don't have that authority, then what are we? What are we? We're not full-time, we're not part-time, we're non-existent because there's no purpose to what our work is about. So again, it's not even about the content of the question to go in front of the people, but it is about what we are, what we serve, what we work hard to get into office to do. Work hard to get into office to do. Each of us worked hard to get here. And now we're trying to do our work, and we have been doing our work, and somebody has decided that our work is not to be acknowledged or respected. I think that's wrong. We're here for a purpose. So it's with that, Mr. Speaker, that I stand in full support. I hope we get the support of our other colleagues, who again, it's not about the question that we're putting in front of the people, but it is the fact that we have passed a law that says the question shall be put in front of the people. That's the law. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much, Senator Yamashita. Any other senator wish to be heard on the resolution? Any senator wish to be heard on the resolution? Seeing none, Senator Winnie Barnes. Did you wish to speak?
Thank you very
Senator
much.
Respicio.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I certainly rise in favor of the resolution. I want to commend the retiring speaker and the sponsor of this resolution for moving forward in a direction that really gives power to the people. And that's what this resolution is about. It's about preserving the legislature's power, which stems from our elected democracy and our democratic form of government where we're our people's representatives. We have to do whatever we can, wherever we can, and whenever we can, Mr. Speaker, to preserve the people's right to ultimately make these decisions through this process. When we passed Bill 215, that was also sponsored by the same sponsor of the resolution, we were very clear that the people should have this right to decide whether or not medical marijuana should be available for those who are in most need of it. And so when we decided to do that, and 14 of us voted in favor of that bill, it wasn't about whether or not any one senator supported this particular issue, but it was about whether or not the people should have that right to choose, and that's why we had an overwhelming support from this legislature. The bill was passed. The governor took the same position, that notwithstanding what his personal position may be on this particular issue, he was not going to stand in the way of letting the people choose what they believe this community should have or should not have by way of this medical marijuana. And so I want to commend the governor for also taking that position. Now, when that Bill 215 was before the Guam Election Commission, the Guam Election Commission had an entirely different position from what we believe the legislature's powers to be. And if we keep going back and forth, Mr. Speaker, just as we keep going back and forth on the issue of the income tax reserve fund and whatever the merits are of that particular issue, we're never going to resolve this particular situation. And so I think that the best case and the only remedy that we have is to support the resolution and to do it on the basis of whether or not the legislature has the authority to provide for referendums. And in any democracy, you would think the answer is yes. But obviously, the people who have the authority to put this thing on the ballot, who are the members of the Guam Election Commission, they don't believe that this is a power reserved for the legislature, and they are acting on behalf of their legal counsel, which is something I also respect. So as a remedy to this whole situation, as an opportunity for us to make sure that this issue is on the ballot on the November election, to move forward in the desire for the people to decide whether or not this community should have medical marijuana pursuant to the provisions outlined in Senator Barnes' Bill 215, I think this resolution is the only thing that we should do at this point. And I want to thank Senator Barnes for her energy in this issue, and I want to thank you also, Mr. Speaker, for your leadership in wanting to say that the only way this issue would be resolved is through the Supreme Court, and we're hoping that our people will have justice in a way of being able to decide on the November election. So thank you for the opportunity to speak briefly on the resolution and for me to offer my support for anything that we can do to preserve our people's right to have these kinds of ability to make these kinds of decisions in our elections. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other senator wish to be heard? If not, you may close.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to add Senator Tom Atta also as a co-sponsor. He was not available.
Hearing no objection.
Thank you. And I again like to... Oh.
All right. I noticed.
I didn't know.
That's fine. We'll just take your motion to amend by adding him, but I'll allow Senator Rodriguez to speak.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise in support of this resolution. You know, although I think everyone knows what my position is on the initial bill itself, I think it's very important that the question be asked to the courts in terms of the powers and authority of this body. And so what this resolution does, Mr. Speaker, is put forth that important question, because maybe not in this body, in future bodies, it's very important to understand what the roles and our powers are. I've said it that the legislative submission process, in my personal opinion, is something that I don't support. However, I think this body, that if it's something that's stated in law, and that if we are to be guided by what our laws are, this question needs to be asked, and be put in front of the higher court. And so I support it. I commend the authors for taking this up and ensuring that this question is asked, because if not, we would all just be wondering, whether what happens to this authority that is afforded to this body. So again, that's my simple rationale and my, to supporting this resolution. So thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much, Senator Rodriguez. On the motion to send the resolution down to the voting file, third reading file, any objection? Hearing and seeing no objection. I'll take a short recess to figure out where I am on the agenda. Thank you very much. The legislature will now go in recess and will reconvene tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. I understand there's going to be a committee on the whole to discuss Bill 207. And so till 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, we stand in recess.